to the British side of India. He sent them across the border to Ludhiana, I think, and there was an immense squabble after his death, after his assassination, that money should somehow come to the surviving members of the Dogra family. But I'm just summarizing their careers, but comparatively, the three brothers never had a position that I know of conflict with the Dogras. Each one had their own territory demarcated, and as I said, Fakir Aijazuddin, his main role was to be the interlocutor with neighbors. In the case of Navtej Singh, he was de facto, de jure, he was the prime minister. And so I don't think there was any overlap in function. And they remained right up to the end of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's life. They remained compatible and on
equally intrigued by the title Fakir, in the sense that it started off as Hakeem's. So why do this prefix, this Fakir? And obviously later on there are these lot of observations by the foreign visitors, by the nationals who came, about the Fakirs, which you might want to elaborate on also.
All right. Well, what you're saying is that they were rich Fakirs. Okay. Yes, this was brought out by Ibn Eden in that famous quote where Fakir Aijazuddin goes to Simla and he's wearing this coarse brown choga, but underneath that there is very heavily embroidered undergarment which is seeded with pearls, and she says comments on it. Yes, there was this.
You almost got Nuruddin Saab married to a British lady, a white lady.
Aijazuddin. Aijazuddin. Yeah. If it had been Nuruddin, I would have been, half British by now. It was Aijazuddin. He goes up to Simla, and Emily Eden, I think rather teasingly, she found an English widow who she thought would make a suitable, name wife for him, name sub for him. It didn't work out. But anyway, but coming back to how the title came, apocryphally, it said that Maharaja Ranjit Singh asked what kind of title, when he was bestowing titles on everybody else, Raja Dinanath, etc. All of them were being given titles. He asked Aijazuddin Saab what kind of title would he like to receive. And it said that Aijazuddin Saab replied that give me a title which, when we're poor, it should describe our condition, but if we're rich, it should teach us humility. And so that is why the title. But the more accurate reason is that there was a particular saint who was revered within the family. And he belonged to, I think, the Qadriya sect. And so they took the title of Fakir from him as a tribute to him. But it was a title that came up during the reign of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. It was never there before and has remained now as a kind of prefix to the family names of all male members of the family ever since then.
But so how was the relationship, in the sense of each brother vis-a-vis Ranjit Singh, Maharaja Ranjit Singh? Was it different? Each one had a different equation. And was there any fallout at some point with someone, or did he mistrust someone at some point?
Once. Oh yes, once. And I think it's only fair, since we are to give an impartial view of it. At one point, I've mentioned this in the book, and I was quite startled to read it. There is an accusation that Fakir Imamuddin had embezzled some money, the revenues from Patoki, which is one of the villages on our side of the border. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh asks Aijazuddin Saab for an explanation, which he gives. And he says that if there is this accusation, then I'm prepared to pay, I think it was twice or three times the amount as a fine. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh doesn't take him up on it. He remains silent. Now, I tried to construe that as being not, Maharaja Ranjit Singh was too, for one thing, he always needed money, and so he was not going to pass up the revenues and allow somebody to sort of walk off with the revenues of a district. I interpreted that as being that he probably suspected it, but then he had received this assurance from Aijazuddin, whom he trusted deeply. And the second is that had he felt there was any evidence of this, of any wrong, defalcation or something, he would never have sent Imamuddin Sahib back to Govindgarh, which he did. And he remained there until his death, Ranjit Singh's death, and then his own death. And then subsequently Tajuddin takes over. So whatever there was this one allegation that was made. And he accepted this. And I wouldn't say he forgave it, but he understood or was given enough sufficient reasons to restore him to that position of trust. The word resourceful fakirs comes up because at one stage, when Ranjit Singh needs money for Khushwant Singh's wedding, he asks each of the Sardars for money, and they all say, well, they plead impoverishment. And so then they say, but go to the fakirs because they're very resourceful.
So that's perhaps the next, so that's perhaps my next question, because I think that brings us to the Kohinoor also. The answer though, is that the incident which actually brings Maharaja Ranjit Singh to, start seeking the Kohinoor? Because as you say that there's this money that is being raised, and the answer that is given is that to look at the Kohinoor that since Shah Shuja was around.
Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and I think it's only fair to say, he had 3 weaknesses, okay? But there were more than just weaknesses, there were obsessions, depending on but not in order of priority as far as he was concerned. But I think the 3, in my mind, one was women. He enjoyed the company of women, regardless of their regardless of their religion, regardless of what their faith was, but he enjoyed the relationship that he had with the opposite sex. The second were horses, and he was a connoisseur of horses, rather like the Queen of England is today. I mean, her private passion, horses. So he had this one, and we all know the story of Leila, etc. The third was jewelry. Not because he liked to adorn himself with it, but he had a kind of acquisitive sense, acquisitive instinct. And I think that is where these various jewels, like the Taimur ruby, which had the names of all the Mughal emperors inscribed on it, the diamonds, the pearls, and he had some matchless pearls. All of these were acquired over a period of time. So I think the temptation when Shah Shuja comes to seek his assistance and his hospitality in Lahore, the temptation to divest him of the Kohinoor proved too much. And so gradually he then...
But you must elaborate on that incident. I think I intervened in between, that when the fakirs were called to raise money for Sher Singh's wedding.
No, Khushwant Singh.
Sorry, Khushwant Singh's wedding. Yep. Yes. So what was the response? I think that's...
Well, Aijazuddin gave some money. I think it was probably 1 lakh rupees, but then, which is a lot of money in those days. When you consider that Maharaja Ranjit Singh knew that all of these people, all of them, whether they were Sikh Sardars, whether they were the Hindu Rajas, whether they were the Dogras or the Muslims, all of them had improved their financial condition and their wealth directly from his largesse. There's no doubt about it, and he knew it. But when he asked for this money and they sort of hummed and hawed, and even Fakir Aijazuddin finally says, well, I've only got 10,000 rupees left, it wasn't because Maharaja Ranjit Singh believed him, but because he probably thought that Aijazuddin was more valuable as a member of the court than as a ATM machine that was to be, providing money. But their relationship, I think, there are various aspects to it, but their relationship, as I've said, cemented, it grew stronger and stronger. And over the years, there's no doubt in my mind that Maharaja Ranjit Singh knew the worth of each one of them. And when I talk about the worth, their level of contribution and their reliability in his court. And I think that is a tribute to his man management, that he was able, despite the weaknesses of people that manifest to him, but he was still able to keep them together and get them working as a team.
But Nuruddin Sahib also, Fakir Nuruddin also wrote what we say the Tariq of Kohinoor, in the sense that it's like a virtual biography.
That was later. That came later because Fakir Nuruddin was present at the time when Shah Shuja was in Lahore, was a guest of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Guest, when I say he was a guest, oblique hostage, in the sense that Maharaja Ranjit Singh more or less kept him in custody. When the particular incident took place, of the detachment of the Kohinoor from Shah Shuja, Nuruddin was a witness to this. And subsequently, after the annexation of the Punjab, then Major McGregor, who was the deputy commissioner, was asked by Delhi, by the Governor General, to have the history of the Kohinoor recorded. And so he writes what was this manuscript called the Tarikh-e-Kohinoor, which was, I think, done in 1851. And it was in Persian. There's a copy of it, I think, in the Khalsa Library in Amritsar. There's a copy of it in the Rampur Library in Rampur. I've not been able to examine those. And there is a copy of that document in the Punjab University, which is the one that I used. And that was in Persian. And in it, then Nuruddin narrates not just the history of the Kohinoor, but then he also narrates his discussions with Wafa Begum, who was the wife of Shah Shuja, and the various vicissitudes that they had to go through as a family. But there's one particular story, if you don't mind my taking up a couple of minutes of your time, one particular anecdote, which I thought was brilliant. I shouldn't be punning on the word Kohinoor and calling it brilliant, but one particular anecdote, where Wafa Begum is asked, what is the value of the Kohinoor? And she says, if you took 5 stones and threw one north, one south, one east, one west, and you took the 5th stone and threw it in the sky as high as it would go, and filled that entire space with gold, it would be less than the value of the Kohinoor. And I thought it was a wonderful image of 5 stones being cast in different directions, and then the 5th going as high into the sky as possible. And the volume of that filled with gold being less than the value of the Kohinoor. And that is an anecdote I picked up from the Tarikh-e-Kohinoor.
You had mentioned Ranjit Singh's love for women, in the sense he had a full harem. And so how was he like a ruler and a man? I mean, actually, I've asked you this question before on a TV show, and it would be great if you come up with the same reply, though.
Well, I'll try to be different. Let me make it, because I think it's true to say, and Navtej will bear me out on this, that when you're dealing with the biography of a person, you cannot just deal with a chronological narrative of them. I mean, that's dull history. What you have to do is to look for the nugget that is going to be, that is going to shine and is going to be symptomatic of personality characteristics or traits. And in the case of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, I'm going to give one example to you. Benting comes to meet him, and they have that famous meeting of the Beaufort. And Maharaja Ranjit Singh then speaks to the Sardars after he said goodbye to Benting on the side of the Sutlej, because Benting and his wife crossed by boat, go across to the British side of the Sutlej. And he comes back and he narrates to them how Lord Benting had taken his wife's hand to steady her as she got into the boat. And he said, I suddenly felt the same, I could see that he had the same love for the lady that I had for Mora. And she's a person who, wherever she is and wherever I am, our thoughts are one. And he's now opening his heart out to this group of Sardars, probably including Aijazuddin, etc. He's opening his heart out as a man, as a human being. And I thought that was a wonderful, not admission, but it was a wonderful insight into his humanity and the fact that this lady, regardless of her religion, regardless of regardless of anything else, of his position, her position, that he had this emotional empathy with her and communion, that this one incident of an Englishman as a matter of courtesy, assisting his wife into the boat, should have evoked that immediate, how can I put it, explosion of response in him. I thought it was a wonderful insight into his character.
मैं थोड़ा जवाब भी दस देना जेड़ा टीवी शो ते सीगा.
दस दे मैं भूल गया.
हाँ, okay. He was a ruler in the morning and a man in the evening.
Aha. Well, well, I didn't realize I'd be quoted back to myself, but thank you for remembering. Yes. Okay. Good.
So one of the things that has intrigued me, and I think Mr. Sarna will also bail me out or help me understand that the biographers or historians have largely not talked about the cultural practices of Ranjit Singh, the kind of music that was there, the kind of food that was there. There's really no reference I've tried to find, but मैंने किते कुछ ऐसी चीज़ नहीं लभदी कि cuisine की सी उस time दा या कुछ any references, any
yes, I think the weakness is ours as historians. Yes.
They add.
Sorry, I suspect the weakness is ours as historians because for a number of years, the only references that we had for Maharaj Ranjit Singh tended to be by Western visitors. And whether it was, the various Ferengis who came, as I said, Hugel, etc., Osborne, Emily Eden, it tended to be derived from that. And it was only after, and I think it's fair to say, after Professor Ganda Singh had begun amassing the library that is now in the Guru Nanak Dev University, it was only when that cache of material became available that people were able to go beyond the simply Imdad Twarikh or sources like that. I suspect that the answer to your question, limited though it is at the moment, the answer to your question lies embedded in the Persian archives, the manuscripts that exist. And there's a whole, as I said, cache of them and the Punjab archives, which have not been translated, we hope are going to be scanned and then digitalized and then translated. But the number of people who are active in Persian and of that period is diminishing, is dwindling. So I'm not too hopeful of that. But I suspect that the answer to your question lies in the paucity of material.
So I think I would agree with you because I, while working on Captain Amrinder's biography, whatever was available outside is separate, but what was available in the palace as part of the Roj Namcha, that is where actually everything is recorded, even what is being cooked, who is the chef, how many people came in, what was the dance, how many tawayabs came in. I mean, it's actually every part. I don't think so anyone has even been to that resource there. So I just limited myself to what I needed. But yeah, maybe it's something like that.
Can I ask you, what was the date of the Roznamcha?
So this is when he was born, 1942. They stopped, I think, in 47.
No, but what was the date of the one that you've relied upon?
So it was in Gurmukhi. So the date starts from the day he was born. That's what I picked up, which was 11th March onwards.
Yeah, but post-British period.
Yeah, it was British period. 42,
yeah, that's why. Because it was the British who had this obsession of, recording what the weather was like and what people ate and the kind of conveyances they used. It is part of their tradition, and it was borrowed, and therefore the Patialas, I'm not surprised at all because of all the Sikh rulers.
But yeah,
most Anglophile were the Patialas.
It was written in Gurmukhi by the Deodidar.
Of course.
But a wonderful document in the sense, I think, volumes and volumes.
Would you like me to come in on something?
Of course, yes.
Aijaz, first I wanted to just say that, I'm reaching you from Simla.
Okay, right.
Just outside Simla, near Mashobra. And I was very intrigued by your references that Aijazuddin Sahab and Nuruddin came to Simla.
Aijazuddin did, Nuruddin never.
Aijazuddin. And of course, one of the points came to my mind was, why did he come here? Because this was not part of Ranjit Singh's empire, I think.
Yeah, good question. Yeah.
So that was one thought. Yes.
Okay.
Please. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to be with you, because we meet in different places. I think we met last in Washington.
Washington, yes.
Yes, we were at a conference together.
And years ago, yes.
I enjoy reading your works, and for me, it's a personal loss that I'm not able to be in more frequent contact with scholars like yourself and friends. I hope I'm not being too daring in describing myself as a friend. The answer was that in the summer the British would take, as you know, the Governor General would, because they would flee from Calcutta and Barrackpore, and they would go up to Shimla, and for 6 months or 5 months of the year they would be in the cooler climes of Shimla. And so when Lord Auckland was there, it was necessary for a delegation to go and have contact. Now, so the first meeting that they have, which is before they go in, he goes in October 1839, and that is after Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death, and it was called what was known as a condolence mission. Okay? And he goes up to Shimla with a group. I think Lena Singh Majetia was with him. They go, but they do not want to be at the mercy of the hospitality of the British. So, and Shimla, being a small hill station, had few houses, all of which had been commandeered by the Governor General's party. And so Aijazuddin and the Sikh delegation are forced to live in tents. And of course, it's raining. And of course, they get soaked. And so then the Governor General arranges for them to have a house. And that is where then they move and have dry accommodation. That was the first of the visits. And then he goes there subsequently. I think he made 2 visits for contact with the Governor General. But these were the only time, the only occasions upon which he actually went up to Simla. But you're absolutely right, because for them it was foreign territory. He was crossing the Sutlej.
Yes.
And but it was, as I say, a diplomatic mission.
Yeah. And you mentioned, since when I wrote the book on Maharaja Dalip Singh, there's a very significant reference to Zahiruddin. Fakir.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And I couldn't get, maybe I missed the beginning of the relationship of Zahiruddin with the 3 brothers. Was he a son of one of them?
Yes. There were 2 who were prominent. Fakir Aijazuddin's children, while he had a number of sons, the eldest one was murdered in a kind of, not an assassination attempt, but it was a murder. Somebody came to the door of the house, and the son happened, he was about 19, I think, and happened to open the door, and this madman who stabbed him. So Aijazuddin's eldest son died like that, tragically. And the other sons remained, and of course there are descendants of the sons. Oddly enough, even in the Andaman Islands, because one of them joined the police service of India pre-1947, was posted to the Andaman Islands, in those the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and I think it was used as a jail, offshore jail kind of thing.
It was Kalapani.
Kalapani. So he lived there, enjoyed it, settled there. So we've got one branch of the family in the Andaman Islands of the Aijazuddin line. Nuruddin's had, Imamuddin also had some children and their living descendants. Nuruddin had 4 sons, of whom 2 continued a relationship with the Sikh Darbar. One was Zahiruddin Sahib, and Zahiruddin Sahib was the tutor to Maharaja Dalip Singh.
Yeah.
Because the British felt that there should be tutors in each of the faiths. So Fakir Zahiruddin Sahib was his tutor in Persian, and he had one who was teaching him the Guru Granth Sahib, and there was another one who was teaching him Hinduism, Sanskrit, etc. So Zahiruddin Sahib then accompanies Maharaja Dalip Singh to Fatehgarh. And while they're in Fatehgarh, then this conversion takes place.
That's right.
And he becomes one of the signatories to the statement that is made. Diwan, I think it was...
Diwan
Diwan Yodhya Prasad?
No, it was Diwan Dinanath, I think.
Dinanath was the finance minister in Lahore.
Ji.
There were three of them.
Yeah. One was Boor Singh.
Boor Singh.
Yeah.
The three people were then asked to sign a statement that the young Maharaja had not been coerced into abjuring his faith.
Yes.
And Fakir Zahuruddin Sahib then signed the statement and then told the Minister Dr. Logan at the time that there was no further need for him to be there because there was no point in teaching him Persian, and so he takes leave and comes back.
It was Diwan Ayodhya Prasad.
Ayodhya Prasad, right.
Gee.
And so he comes, then the younger brother, Fakir Kamruddin Sahib, young boy, young man, he must have been about 17, I think, or 18. He is then deputed to accompany Maharani Jinda as she's taken out of the Punjab on her way to Benares. And his function was that he had to identify that it was her in the tent, because nobody else was allowed, and certainly the British were not allowed in, and the captain in charge of the convoy. And so it was his function to go inside, meet her, come out, and then confirm that it was in fact she who was actually the Rani inside. There's a very, Navtej, you may not have read my book, The Resource for Fakirs, but there was a particular incident which was very odd in my mind, but was almost miraculous. I went to see I'd been researching at the archives, and I found the daily report that had been written by a man called Captain Matthews, who was asked to accompany Maharani Jinda, and he then sends a report back to the Darbar every day. And in that, he mentions that Dalip Singh is, that Zahud Fakir Kamruddin goes in, confirms Maharani Jinda's presence, and that she's very fond of him. And she calls him Dolu, affectionately. Acha. And I saw this reference, and anyway, I filed it and I made my notes. Many years later, I am sitting with a great aunt of mine who happened to be Fakir Kamruddin's granddaughter, who was still alive, and she was in her late 80s. So I was going through, and I made her go through the family tree, and I said, look, we know who the men were because they come from chiefs and families of Punjab, the genealogy is there, but who were the women? So can you identify who? And so she went through and gave me the names of all of the women. And when I asked her whether she remembered Fakir Kamruddin Sahib, her nana, and she said, oh yes, yes. He used to wear this choha, and he made my brother and myself, we were young children, and we would sit in his arm, enfolded in his arms, and he put the choha around us, and then he would narrate stories about the Sikh Darbar, and then about the journey that was made with Maharani Jinda. And she said, she was told me in Punjabi, कि any raftar nal hatni gaye ne, any raftar अंग्रेज़ां ਨੂੰ ਇੰਨੀ ਜਲਦੀ ਸੀ, ਇਸ ਰਫਤਾਰ ਤੇ ਗਏ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਅੱਖੀਆਂ ਹਥਨੀਆਂ ਅੰਧੀਆਂ ਹੋ ਗਈਆਂ ਮਿੱਟੀ ਨਾਲ. And then she said, I said, was he very close to Maharani Jinda? She said, yes, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਬੜਾ ਪਿਆਰ ਸੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਦੋਲੂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਨ.
Oh, wow.
And so independently, this report by Captain Matthews was verified from her recollection of Fakir Kamruddin Sahib. So there was history sort of reconnecting itself in my mind through these two independent sources.
Absolutely.
So that was Kamruddin Sahib's relationship. He then had the onerous responsibility that when the British wanted to divest Maharani Jinda of her jewelry, they went in and demanded her jewels. And she said, well, I'll separate what are the Darbar jewels from my personal jewels. And then Fakir Kamruddin Sahib had to list out the jewels. He preferred not to. He said, I'm ill, I'm sick. And so they realized it was a ruse, but they forced him. So then he listed out the jewelry, and then was given that the state jewelry, the Darbar jewelry, to take back to Lahore with him. And that was the end of the contact between Maharani Jinda and him. But I thought it was a lovely idea of him being so close to her that she called him Dolu as the pet name. Rather nice.
So
But that was the connection between Zahuruddin.
Anything else? Sorry, Mr. Sarna, are you asking something?
No, I was just saying that this point that Aijaz Sahab made of separating personal jewels from state jewels. That's a very interesting point that runs through, and it is a point which is, since you discussed the Kohinoor, this is a point which has also been made regarding the Kohinoor.
Yes,
and if you see the terms of annexation of 1849, there is a distinction made in the clauses of what is the Kohinoor, according to that, was interpreted later by Dalip Singh as that this is personal property, and it's not state property. So you have actually confiscated the Kohinoor. So that's a whole different debate. But I don't want to take you in that direction. I'll turn it back to.
Fair enough. I think it's an interesting point.
Well, can I just add one thing because Navtej Sahab has mentioned this, and I think it'd be fun to say this. William Dalrymple and Anita Anand have prepared this book called The Kohinoor. They came to Lahore.
Kohinoor. I was the third author on that book in the original contract. And I got appointed as High Commissioner to London.
Yes.
And I had to go back to them and say, listen, I can't do this because I can't be sitting in London and writing the truth about the Kohinoor.
Well, now that explains it.
Wonderful. So William still talks about that, but that's how that book began.
Well, they would, forgive my saying so, they would have benefited from your contribution, believe me. We were holding the Lahore Literary Festival, and the book had just come out, the Indian edition. And so William brought a copy for me. Now, I had included, as you know, an addendum about the Kohinoor, which was in my sea quarters by European artists, and it was done in 1979. So much so that when the Queen Mother was shown that book by a particular common friend of ours, and she read that, and she said, oh my God, I had no idea this was the history of the Kohinoor, and I've been wearing it, Anyway, Willie brings the book to me, and Anita's there. And I quickly went through it, because I had to interview them the next day. And I went through it, and it was full of avoidable mistakes. And so next day I arrived with all of them flagged. And Willie said, oh my God, we'll have to stop the London edition because it's in press. So I gave him all the corrections, and it was silly mistakes, like that Edward VII had been crowned on the 22nd of January, 1901. And I said, Queen Victoria died on that day, so how could he have been crowned on the same day? Things like that. Just careless mistakes, but a number of others. But when the interview took place at the Lahore Literary Festival, and I'll close with this, after they made their presentation, Willie is over the top, and he makes his sort of grand presentation. And then Anita made hers. And so when I had to summarize, and I said, it was 178 carats when it was delivered to Queen Victoria, and it was reduced to 106, I think. So what happened to the other 72 carats? And William said, I don't know. I said, hang on a moment. They were as much part of the Kohinoor as the residual 700 or so carats. So where is that? And so if India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh are now going to claim the Kohinoor, we want that as well. So trace it. They hadn't bothered to check it. To me, I thought that was very, very important because,
important point, yes.
Where is it? Where is the rest of the Kohinoor? We only know the bit that's left. So we know what it looked like when it was given, and we know what it looked like at the end, but what happened in between? Anyway, I just thought for our readers,
fair enough. I think we've kind of, it's an interesting flow of things. But if I just come back to a couple of questions, and this, I think I'm just kind of pulling it back to the same, this thing. But
pulling our leash.
No, one of my questions actually is that what was the kind of the influence of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, of the Sikh Empire on Lahore, but what is the influence now? Does he stand as a tall figure? What exactly does Maharaja Ranjit Singh mean to people of Lahore or to the culture of Lahore?
Well, I think it meant much more in 1947, before 1947, than it could do today, because there was a thriving Sikh community, and the perpetuation of the association of the recollection of the Sikh Darbar was sharper then than it is today. Now, over the years, it has become more commemorative than anything else, which is on Maharaja Ranjit Singh's death anniversary, or the various jathas who go to Nankana Sahib, to Dera Sahib, and also who go to Panja Sahib. So, or now, as they're intended, to Kartarpur. I think the relevance, or at least the recollection, is fading over a period of time. So if I was to ask the common person in the street who was Maharaja Ranjit Singh, they would know that he was a Sikh ruler, that he was Punjabi, but not much beyond that. So I think that that is why I regard these.
There was a statue of his which was also.
Yes, indeed. That statue was put up by some expatriates. In fact, an expatriate Sikh who paid for, he got some money together and they paid for the statue, which is outside what's called the Rani Jinnah Gallery, which is where the Princess Bamba collection is on display. And I think the fact that it could have been put up, and the fact that it is still there, and it's a reminder of people that the fort was not just a Mughal fort, but it had an equal association with Maharaja Ranjit Singh and the Sikh period. So I think there's certainly there's no hostile feeling towards the period of Sikh rule. It's quite the reverse. It's more affectionate, an affectionate remembrance.
In the sense, is it a strong part of history books? Is it still, or has it been just kind of like what's happening all over the world, that you're just, selective history is being now showcased?
Yes. I think history is not the recollection of the victors. It's the recollection of the survivors. And people tend to write history because that is the way they would like history to be remembered, not the way it actually was. It's a very bold historian who would stand outside his own self, his own nationality, his own epoch, and be able to take any history of any subject and give it its due fair importance. That is what I like to feel, that when this book of the Resourceful Fakirs came out, and I do recommend, I'm plugging my own book, but it was published in India, so I'm proud of it. The people ask me, why isn't there more about the three brothers? And it seems to be a biography of Ranjit Singh. And I said, because that was the secret of their success. They never obtruded into the political scene. They were persons who were there on stage, but they were never center stage. And that was the secret of their success, that they gave importance to the Maharaja and to his family, not to themselves. So if you can write history like that, then wonderful. But I'm not sure that the persons who write the modern curriculum books, history books for curricular purposes, they are as fair, as impartial as they ought to be. This is something we feel. It's true, whether it's a Mughal history, British history, any other history.
In any case, we have a 100% duty now on books from Pakistan. So your book is out for some time.
Well, okay, get it in the Amazon secondhand or whatever. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I'll end with this, my question, conversation, and then we can open it up. There was a piece which you sent me recently, The Permanence of Punjabiyat. It's titled that, where you actually basically write that there have been only two people who've kind of connected Punjabis, the way they have. First was Guru Nanak and Veer, and the other was Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So do you think Punjabiyat will triumph as a geographical area? I mean, or there'll be two separate isolated pockets where Punjabiyat will, survive, will just be on its, have its own terms and conditions, or it will remain that one,
well,
it was.
Khushwant, let me be fair to me. I didn't say that they were the only two people. Okay, that would be dismissive of all of the enormous number of people who made contributions on either side. Okay, what I was trying to put across was that there were two persons who gave Punjabiyat an identity. Okay, the first was Guru Nanak Dev Ji, who gave it a religious identity, where the religion had its roots and its outer perimeter in what was the geography of the Punjab at the time. Okay, it was not a religion that within 50 years had sort of crossed the seas and was known in other countries. It was a religion that was specific, it had its roots within the Punjab, the geography of the Punjab. And the second was to compare him to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who gave Punjab a state, who gave it the identity of a nation state. Never before, never afterwards, because it was always in between. So you had, invaders coming in, going out, or it was the satraps were in control, but it was never a sovereign state. And that is why I drew this comparison between a religious, how can I put it, a religious Punjabiyat, restricted to the geography of the Punjab, under Guru Nanak Dev Ji and the successor gurus. And on the other side, Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who creates a secular nation state, which collapses after his death, and of course the death of his successors. When you ask, will Punjabiyat be restricted to the east on either side of the Ravi now? Okay. Well, that was the whole point I was making, that today you can go anywhere in the world, and wherever Punjabi is spoken by anyone, that to me is evidence of Punjabiyat. It's the nation, the identity, or the association with a particular culture. If I'm singing a Punjabi song in New York, or if I'm singing it in Brisbane, or I'm humming it in Singapore, there'll be an immediate response from somebody, and it does not have to be Sikh, it can be a Hindu, it can be a Muslim, anybody, but anybody who identifies with the Punjab. So to me, Punjabiyat now, rather like, and I mentioned that in the article, it's rather like Judaism, it's rather like the Jews. They are a diaspora now throughout the world. You don't need to be in Israel, and Navtej was the ambassador to Israel, I hope bear me out. You don't need to be in Israel, resident in Israel, to be a Jew. You can be a Jew anywhere in the world, and therefore you can be a Punjabi anywhere in the world. So that is why, for me, Punjabiyat exists, as long as you've got people who speak Punjabi, who eat Punjabi food, who enjoy Punjabi music, and who honor, as we do on this side of the border, notables as Maharaja Ranjit Singh and Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And I think that is the strength of Punjabiyat. It has survived, and it will survive as long as you've got people who want it to survive, and which is why I value this interaction.
So true.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that calls for a big round of applause. I think that's
right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us. And I think now we are ready for some questions. I think Sarna.
Yes, so I request all of you, if you have a question, please type in the chat window. We may not be able to take all the questions. So I have one by Mr. Thapar, which was also my question.
Okay.
So it's gone somewhere behind, back at the chat window. But the question was, which I really want to ask, like, women nowadays struggle between mother and mother-in-law. How did Maharaja Ranjit Singh strike that balance with his mother and his mother-in-law? And I have not seen that in any other empire, women being so ambitious. Men have always been ambitious, but I've never heard about a woman except here being so ambitious that she was ready to marry her daughter to Maharaja Ranjit Singh just so that she has a say in his court.
Well, to be fair to her, she was a very strong-willed lady. So much so that although she created him, and I think he always remained in her debt for it, when I think it is Sher Singh is getting married, she refuses to allow the grandchildren to come to the wedding because she wants to assert her position, okay? But I think on balance, Maharaja Ranjit Singh was far kinder to his mother-in-law than many of us are, right? And certainly that other rulers were. For one thing, he respected her enormously. Number two, that she was a person who had been in the field. When I say in the field, she was almost as if she had, like the Rani of Jhansi, as if she had been, a warrior. It was a very strong personality. But I think it's, one tends to minimize this. And that is the role of women in the Sikh community and their position and the strength of their, they became the fulcrum within the community, within their respective families. And it wasn't just a question of them remaining within the Chahdiwari, etc. There were persons who had opinions and whose opinions had to be respected and whose orders had to be obeyed. So it wasn't just a question by accident. It was something which was inherent within the social fabric. And he honored that. It would have been very easy for him, like Nero, to have had her put to death or something like that. He never did, nothing like that. Yes, the kind of, interference that she could have in the court. But I don't think he ever reached the stage of destroying her. So it says a lot for him and his relationship. Please.
Any other questions?
Do you have any other question? I don't have anything in the chat window.
There's someone who's asking the Fakir Sahib, could you touch upon the literacy rate?
Yes. Fakir Sahib, could you touch upon the literacy rate during Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign? It was one of the highest in the world, apparently.
I think you've been watching the TED lectures that have been given by my distant cousin, Fakir Saifuddin. And while he's a member of the family, but all of us have, we can't answer for all the sins in our genealogy. He's made this preposterous assertion that it was the highest. There's no evidence of it at all. Most of the education that took place tended to be inside. There were no formal institutions outside madrasas or dharamshalas, etc. But there was no formal system of education, certainly not at the state level. But the very fact, rather like you had in Victorian England, the fact that you could produce people from home education of such stature and such intellect meant that there was this, there was a quality in the domestic education, which was available, by the way, to both men and women. So, for example, my grandmother never went to school. She and her sisters, she had two sisters, and they never went to school formally, but they were all trained in the Diwan-e-Hafiz, the various Divans, Iqbal, etc. So it was a tradition within the family, not as Muslim families, any family. All of them paid attention, but within the Chahdiwari as such. So please don't take stories like this. I mean, that it was the highest level of education throughout. Please, it's. I think we have to be more realistic than that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to unmute Lily, ma'am,
okay.
And she will have a question here, ma'am. Please go ahead.
So, congratulations for this wonderful. It's many of us participating. Sir, you are so articulate. Faizuddin Sahib, that it's wonderful to hear you, Fakir Sahib. I have a request at the end of this session, and that is, could you perhaps hum a Punjabi song for all of us? One of your favorites?
Madam, first of all, thank you for softening me up with the compliments. But, well, it's sweet of you, yes. But nevertheless, I think it would destroy whatever image I have created in your mind as an art historian. If I was now to suddenly burst into song, I think people like Mehdi Hassan and Nurjan, etc., are far better qualified. So if you do want to hear a Punjabi song, go to Aswad Amanat, Umar al-Langiya, go to him, or even go to Ali Sethi, who's the latest exponent of Punjabi Geet. Listen to them. I defer to them completely.
Okay.
Okay, I think, so I think, yeah, we don't have any. Okay,
there is a question by Abhilasha here. Could you explain the contradiction between the Punjabi woman seen as strong-minded and that so-called socialist Punjabi man?
Well, how do you want me to explain it? I mean,
so what is this in Ranjit Singh's context? I guess.
Well, it's the women. Look, I think we can accept with open-mindedness that this idea that one gender was more powerful, was more equipped than another gender, I think that's thrown out of the window. Not as a modern concept, but I think it is tradition. Over the years, over the centuries, we have to accept that whatever may have been the nominal or the historical perception, in reality, women were as powerful as men were in deciding things, in deciding what mattered. Yes, of course, there were exceptions.
There's a question which maybe both of you can take, Mr. Sarna, as well as this thing. So there's a question by Madhusudan. Yeah.
Fakir Saab, there's a saying that during the time of Maharaja Dalip Singh, Dalip Singh's rule, every Punjabi was given middle name of Singh and Kaur beyond the barrier of religion. So what's the reality behind this?
During the Dalip Singh's time?
He never ruled in the sense.
No, I think this is, to the best of my knowledge, wasn't it Guru Gobind Singh who had made it?
This is beyond any religion, they say.
Oh,
I don't think so. There is.
Navtej, you would know this better.
No, I've never read this anywhere, because poor Maharaja Dalip Singh was actually a child king who was at the age of 7 or something, or even less, and then in 3 years' time, the Punjab was annexed and he was exiled. So I don't think he ruled in any real sense at all. So frankly, I don't think where this is coming from. There's a better question on Maharaja Dalip Singh if you have the time in your chat window, but I'll leave it to the moderators to decide if you want to take that.
Okay.
Sorry, well, I lost you, Mr. Sarna. That there's a better?
I said there is another question on Maharaja Dalip Singh in your chat window.
Okay,
but,
yes.
On this aspect, I've never heard anybody.
Okay, yeah, please answer that question. Do you want to read it out?
The question is, what is your view, Fakir Saab, on Maharaja Dalip Singh, his stay in UK and France, and his failed attempt to come back to the subcontinent? How much was Brit monarchy responsible for his inabilities? I've lost it. And how much of it was just down to his own lack of competence?
Competence, yeah. Okay.
Competencies, yes.
All right. Navtej is written on him, so and most of you are familiar through this film, The Black Prince. It's by the way, have you seen that one which has Shabana Azmi as Rani Jinda?
Yes.
Sorry, you were going to say it.
No, I'm going to say it before you. I'm very disappointed with that film. In many
actually,
ways.
everyone is. Yeah.
Oh, totally. It was a disaster as a film.
Yeah.
I'm being very harsh about it. But to me, her performance was remarkable for one reason. Well, for two reasons. She never spoke any Punjabi. She doesn't know how to speak Punjabi, Shabana. And I asked her this. I said, how did you manage? And well, she said, I had to be coached in it, but I can't speak any Punjabi. But the second thing was, I said, you were able to convey the force of character that this woman had, Rani Jinda originally, where she's taken in 1861 from Calcutta. She dies in 1863. During that time, she's living in Kensington. Okay, and she's forced, she has her favorite maid with her, and she's wearing ghagris, underneath her crinoline, and she's wearing a bonnet and then dupatta on top of it and her jewelry, etc. Here is a woman who couldn't speak any English, and her son, Dalip Singh, could speak a smattering of Punjabi. And yet, within those 2 years, she was able to undo everything that the British had tried, Logan had tried. Would you agree with that, Sarnaji?
Absolutely. I think she if it hadn't been for the fact that he came to met her, and then he literally resisted all pressures to take her back with him to England. And in those 2 years, he got the realization of what he had lost. And there was no other way that he, before 1861, he was entirely in Victoria's hands. And then, in those 2 years, she told him what the reality was in great detail. And then he started studying the papers and trying to find out what really happened.
Well, I'm trying to put it, let me put it more specifically in a chronological way. Here is a child whom she had left in 1846. She was removed.
Yes.
Okay. He was born in 1838. 1846, he's 8 years old, and he's separated from his mother. He's taken to Shalimar Gardens. She is removed, and he's not particularly concerned. He accepts it.
Yes.
Logan is in charge. So at the age of 8, he doesn't see his mother again until 1861. So that is between 47 until 1860. So for 14 years, he doesn't see her at all. He meets her, and then within 2 years, this lady who doesn't speak English, and he speaks very little Punjabi, is able to convince him of all the things that Navtej has said so accurately, convince him of his heritage, and bring him to the point of conversion where he sees not just the recovery of the Punjab, but recovery of his faith. Now, she must have been an immensely powerful woman to have been able to achieve that just within what the British had tried to do ever since Logan was appointed his tutor in 1846. 1846 to 1861 is 15 years of indoctrination, exposure to the royal family, being painted by Winterhall, and.
Yes.
And being the godson of Queen Victoria, and being, they were hoping that he would marry Victoria Gurama of Coorg, and that you would have this Sikh convert, and you have this, but these, for her to undo 15 years of propaganda, I think was a remarkable achievement.
So there's one question which pertains to, the topic which we were discussing also, and it's come to me privately. Let me ask this, and maybe after this we can kind of wind up.
Yes, certainly.
So it's by Supreet Dhiman, actually. She asks, how did Fakir brothers deal with the exile of Duleep Singh? What professions did they embrace post-exile, or did they choose to retire per se?
Well, by the time the annexation had taken place, Aijazuddin was dead, Imamuddin was dead. Fakir Nuruddin kind of switched sides, where he became a member of the Regency Council on behalf of, to supervise Duleep Singh between 46 and 49. And then subsequently, he becomes kind of Eminence Grease, who's a Darbari. The two sons, when I say Darbari, not in the sense that they were given that designation. Of the two sons, Fakir Kamruddin emerges with more importance, and he becomes a Darbari, and then in turn his his son-in-law, Fakir Iftikharuddin, becomes the plenipotentiary to Kabul. So they moved into government positions, they became Jagirdars, responsible for managing the Jagirs that were left by Aijazuddin and Fakir Nuruddin. Imamuddin didn't leave much property. There is a street in Amritsar where the Fakirs were supposed to have a house, which is still called, named after the Fakirs. But they moved into government positions, and didn't have any continuing association with them. When I was researching Sikh portraits by European artists and on the Bamba collection, I then visited Princess Bamba's grave, and I used to go there on March the 10th every year and put flowers on her grave on behalf of everybody. And I traced Maharaja Sher Singh's Shabilavu, the Baradari, which is where he was shot on the 15th of September, 1843, and where he was cremated, because they didn't bother to bring him back to the fort to be cremated where his father had been cremated. They just burnt him there. They cremated him there with his two wives. And so there was this small samadhi in the Shikarga as such. So one has tried to maintain that kind of personal contact with them through these visits and honoring their memory. Good. I think we'll have to close it now, because it's actually Ramzan and Iftari. So what you've got is a fasting fakir.
And thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope we can bring you, as a guest to Hoshiarpur, and it'll be such a pleasure to host you.
Yes.
I'm really, it didn't work out in March, but I'm an optimist, and I will get you here. Thank you so much.
I look forward to it, and I'm so grateful to both of you for making this possible, and also to all of the silent audience. but you're very much in our thoughts. And I think I'd just like to reiterate how much people in Pakistan value the Sikh heritage that we have. I'd written a piece once. I said, those who forget history are not condemned to relive it, but those who forget history are condemned to forfeit it. And if we now just forget our history, then we stand in the danger of forfeiting it. And let me end with that, and wish you all warmest regards and recollections of a shared heritage.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, everyone. And Sanam, yes, the final note, please.
Thank you, Fakir sir. Thank you, Khushwant sir. Thank you, Navtej sir. I think it was a brilliant session. Thanks to all the audience. We had some great questions. We couldn't take all of them, but I think the ones we took were great. So I just don't have the heart to end this meeting, but we would not, we don't want to have a fasting Fakir anymore. So we'll let you enjoy the delicious meals of Iftari, and thank you so much once again for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to end this meeting now, and really don't feel like, but then we have to. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Sarna. It was nice.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone else. Yes.